statement to the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I usually thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of her statement, but it was handed to me just as I was leaving my office to come down here, so I can only assume she entrusted it to the Transport Secretary to deliver it to me. Mr. Speaker, our country is facing the biggest crisis in a generation, and yet the Prime Minister continues to recklessly run down the clock. We were promised there would be a deal last October. It didn't happen. We were promised a meaningful vote on a deal in December. It didn't happen. We were told to prepare for a further meaningful vote this week after the Prime Minister again promised to secure significant and legally binding changes to the backstop, and that hasn't happened. Now the Prime Minister comes before the House with more excuses and more delays. In her statement, the Prime Minister has failed to answer even the most basic questions. What progress has she made on identifying and working up the alternative arrangements? Have they been presented to the European Union? If not, when will they be presented? And will she set them out before this House and ask for its approval of them? In truth, Mr. Speaker, it appears the Prime Minister has just one real tactic: to run down the clock, hoping members of this House are blackmailed into supporting a deeply flawed deal. This, Mr. Speaker, is an irresponsible act. She's playing for time and playing with people's jobs, our economic security and the future of our industries. Yesterday, growth figures show the lowest growth since 2012, our manufacturing sector mired into recession. The decision by Nissan last week to pull its investment from the Sunderland plant may only be the thin end of a very long wedge. Uncertainty and failing confidence in this government to deliver are putting jobs at risk. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Business Secretary will be hearing the same warnings as I am, that several major large manufacturers, household names employing tens of thousands of people, are poised to follow in Nissan's footsteps. Earlier today, we heard from the Leader of the House that the next meaningful vote may not happen until after the EU summit on the 21st of March, just days before Brexit is due to happen. If, Mr. Speaker, this is not the case, can the Prime Minister tell the House today when the meaningful vote will be? We also learned from the Leader of the House that any changes to the backstop won't be written into the legally binding withdrawal agreement. Can the Prime Minister confirm that? Is the Prime Minister really prepared to risk people's livelihoods, jobs and investment in a desperate attempt to push a deeply flawed deal through Parliament? The Prime Minister has just told members of this House to hold their nerve. Tell that to Nissan workers in Sunderland and the thousands more worried about their job security and the future of their communities. Mr. Speaker, no minister serious about protecting jobs in this country would allow a Prime Minister to deliberately run down the clock and play chicken with people's livelihoods. To stand by and do nothing would be a complete dereliction of duty. As I received, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's letter yesterday in response to Labour's Brexit plan, it became clearer to me the Prime Minister is merely engaged in the pretence of working across Parliament to find solutions. She has not indicated she will move one iota away from her rejected deal or any of her red lines. On the backstop, the Prime Minister has pointed out Labour also has concerns. But let's make no mistake about it, that has never been a major issue with the Prime Minister's deal. Indeed, in order to stop the UK falling into the backstop, we need a permanent customs union, and a strong single market deal. That is the key, Mr. Speaker, to maintaining an open border on the island of Ireland. That is key to protecting jobs, industry and living standards in this country. That is why it's backed by businesses who employ and trade unions who represent millions of workers in this country. And to correct the Prime Minister's claim in her statement, we want to negotiate a new UK-EU customs union, as I set out in my letter. The Prime Minister says there is no need to negotiate a customs union, as her deal provides for the benefit of being in one. I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, that is simply not the case. The deal the Prime Minister negotiated means there will be barriers to trade in goods. And there will not be frictionless trade, putting manufacturers across the country at a huge disadvantage. This is made quite clear in the political declaration, especially when it says, and I quote, "The parties will form separate markets and distinct legal orders," and concedes that, and I quote, "can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes for administrative processes as well as checks and controls." Nothing is secured. The Prime Minister is also trying to win support for her deal by promising to protect workers' rights after Brexit. Well, Mr. Speaker, just look at the record of the party opposite.
Yes, that's right, Jeremy.
They attacked trade union rights through the Trade Union Act. They kept this House up all night, opposing the minimum wage in 1997. They're the party that introduced employment tribunal fees and introduced the public sector pay cap. For many of them, Mr. Speaker, ripping up rights is what Brexit is all about. Take the Secretary of State for International Trade. He once wrote, "It's too difficult to hire and fire, too expensive to take on new employees," and went on to say, "It is intellectually unsustainable to believe that workplace rights should remain untouchable." Yes. That was the Secretary of State for Trade. No wonder trade union leaders like Tim Roach of the GMB, Francis O'Grady, the Secretary of the TUC, have rejected the Prime Minister's inadequate pledges. And it's vital too, Mr. Speaker, that we keep pace with the best consumer safeguards and environmental protections, as if the warnings of the destruction of our biodiverse natural life are not serious enough. We have to be very serious about all environmental protections and indeed make them much stronger. Mr. Speaker, there is a sensible way forward, but the Prime Minister is refusing to listen. Labour's alternative has been widely welcomed as a way of breaking the impasse. From business leaders, European leaders, and even from some Conservative MPs. But the Prime Minister refuses to listen. Mr. Speaker, I urge all members across this House to think about the damage the Prime Minister's strategy is doing. The threat to industry and skilled jobs and communities all across this country. Now is not the time to stand idly by. Now is the time to stand up and do the right thing, to rule out no deal and back Labour's alternative plan.